Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, it's another entry in our ongoing Global Gonzo series. We're going to be traveling to Brazil with... Say it for me, Travis. What's his name?
His name was José Marica Marins, and he was a Brazilian filmmaker who made the first horror film produced in Brazil. It was in 1964, and it was called At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul.
And we'll be digging deep into this film in just a bit, but first, we have some calls to action, and we have the best kinds of calls to action this week because we have 3 Patreon subscribers to thank for their subscription to patreon.com/genrevision. We've got Eric D. Snyder, Adam Dawes, and Goke?
Yeah, Goke, I believe it is.
Okay, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, but we want to thank you guys so much for becoming premium subscribers over at patreon.com/genrevision. You guys now have access to the growing library of Patreon material that we've been doing. If you like what we're doing here, please go to patreon.com/genrevision and become a premium subscriber. It gets you more stuff. You'll get a little behind the scenes. We're doing pre-show discussions every week now. We just finished recording one that was, I think, our lengthiest one in recent memory.
Yeah, in recent memory. I think we've done ones that are maybe up to an hour long of just you and I shooting the shit. The discussions are always fun, and we're putting up one every week while this whole social distancing thing is in effect. So please go enjoy that at patreon.com/genrevision. Sign up to become a premium subscriber. It costs $5 a month.
So we are continuing our Global Gonzo series. This is the second entry so far, and it's our attempt to look at international film that has kind of a reputation for being kind of crazy, out there, bizarre, weird. And this one I decided I kind of forced it onto the schedule because José Marica Marins passed away earlier this year. He's best known for portraying the character that came to be known as Coffin Joe in a number of movies, some of which he wrote and directed. And he's kind of, in a way, the Brazilian film equivalent of a Freddy Krueger or a Jason.
Yeah, he became a cultural icon in Brazil. And some of the films had become sort of, I don't know, I hesitate to say cult classics, but there is a DVD box set of the Coffin Joe trilogy available here in the US. And so they have enough of a following here for niche foreign horror fans to be aware of the character, but definitely a pop culture phenomenon in Brazil. He was in, I don't know how many films as this character.
Oh, yeah, an incredible number. And we'll talk about, I think, some of the other Coffin Joe films when we get to the end here, because this is the first one, At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul, from 1964. This is the only one that Travis and I have seen. This is our first time seeing it. I'd known about these movies for a long time. I knew about Marins as a figure in kind of horror culture, but I'd never actually sat down and watched the movie. After watching it, it is it is such a ride, especially when you put it in the context of 1964. It's a movie that it's got to be one of the gorier movies I've seen from this early era. The only other really gory movie I can think of that would predate this would be Fiend Without a Face. This is a genuinely transgressive amateur production, but as amateur as it is, Marins is a director. I mean, he's a co-writer, he's the star, producer. Marins has a vision in place, and it's right out there from the get-go in the very first shot of the movie, in which it simply opens up with Coffin Joe looking directly into the camera and pointing into it, talking to the audience, telling them, what is life? It's the beginning of death. And it's like, all right, I'm strapped in. Let's go.
Yeah. And so he outlines the primary themes of the film. He talks about the continuation of blood is basically passing on your genes. You know, it's the only guarantee that you're going to have life after death. After that, we get a really fantastic ooky spooky credit sequence. And you guys need to understand, this is produced on a shoestring budget, and not a US shoestring budget, a Brazilian shoestring budget. Mm-hmm. So is it full of crazy cool production value? I think for the kind of film that it is, being produced with so little money, and in Brazil in the early 1960s, like, yeah, it has a certain charming production value to it. And you see some of that in the credit sequence. And then after the credit sequence finishes, you get another character sort of talking to the camera and introducing you to the film you're about to see. And it's this witch character who is just awesome. I love her.
Oh, she's so good. She talks directly to the audience in the theater, and she's saying, if you believe in ghosts, or you're superstitious, or you believe in life after death or anything, don't watch this movie. She directly tells people, like, leave the theater right now, which is, I miss this kind of old school hucksterism.
It's like a William Castle thing almost.
Yeah, it's a William Castle. I think about I think it's the opening to Frankenstein, where a guy steps out and on, the stage and saying, like, okay, you're going to see this. You're going to see some shit. Like
Hitchcock did the same thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, this has largely gone the way of the dodo. There is something still, like, I remember the Evil Dead remake said it was the most terrifying cinematic experience or something like that. And, movies have largely abandoned that kind of marketing. But you come to know the bizarre world of Coffin Joe fairly quickly. I don't think it's ever explained exactly where he lives, or like the scale of where he lives, whether or not it's a really small town or like a suburb on the outskirts of some larger city. Maybe that's something that I'm just sort of missing culturally. But this guy, Coffin Joe, who in the original Brazilian Portuguese is Zé do Caixão, and Zé is his real name, and do Caixão means of the coffin. Zé does not literally translate to Joe, but that's just what he was called in the U.S. because it's marketable and it caught on.
Well, and it's also important because it defines his profession. He is this town, village, whatever collective's undertaker.
Well, and the grave digger, and he puts people in the coffins, and I think he actually makes the coffins as well.
Yeah, he's the cemetery man.
So in the beginning, he comes upon a burial, and this woman is mourning her lost husband, and he starts dropping some serious shit right away.
Well, I love, even before he says anything, we have a shot of the mourners, and they're, standing over the gravesite, and the coffin's going in and everything. And then everybody turns their heads to look at something off frame. Cut to Coffin Joe standing on like this little tiny mound. He's got his arms at his hips, kind of thing. And he's dressed like Jack the fucking Ripper.
Yeah, top hat and all.
It's so awesome.
I mean, laughable, but like sort of adorably goofy. And the movie kind of knows it. It has a sense of humor.
Oh, absolutely. And immediately, just from seeing him in this setup where it's like people are sad and mourning, and he looks almost joyous. Like he is a superhero of death.
Well, I love how this movie sort of revels in the awful, and it's this sort of celebratory goth vibe. Like when the witch appears after the credits, she wishes us all a terrible evening. I was like, okay, all right, bad vibes only. I get it.
The way I describe it is it's gleefully profane. It's important to note that this movie was made shortly after Brazil loosened its censorship laws,
which explains a lot.
Yeah, yes. And so immediately it was like, all right, we're going to have all this repressed Catholic stuff come out into this movie, because Coffin Joe is a character. He's an absolute hedonist. He despises religion, superstition, faith of any kind. We get to know this because, don't worry, at any opportunity, Coffin Joe will tell you what he thinks.
He's such a fucking atheism subreddit edgelord in a lot of ways.
He is the ultimate edgelord.
He goes home, and of course he's going to give his wife a whole bunch of shit because he's a dick. And his wife's like, well, here's dinner. And he goes, why the hell aren't you serving me meat? I want red meat. Give me some beef or something. And she's like, well, it's Friday. You get fish. You're Catholic. We're Catholic. The fucking country's Catholic. Fish on Friday. It's great line. He goes, what do I care if it's holy or if it's the devil's Friday?
The lines are so great. He says, I'll eat meat today, even if it's human flesh. And it's just like,
yeah. Well, and then later he says, I'll get what I want and no Bible thumper will stop me. So his sort of rebelliousness and his edgelording is just utterly hilarious. And so he goes out, he defies his wife Lenita's wishes. He manages to get his hands on some meat and he's eating it like a caveman in front of this procession of Catholic worshipers.
Well, because it's like a full-on medieval times giant leg of meat.
Oh yeah,
and before he has another line that I love where when he's leaving to go out to get some meat, he says to his wife Lenita, he says, "If I run into the devil, I'll invite the devil to dinner." Mm-hmm. Like he just says all this wonderful, wonderful stuff. But yes, then the shot, which we're going to talk about shot composition, where Joe is sitting kind of in front of a window or something, and there is this procession going on outside with a bunch of priests and stuff, and he's eating the meat right in front of him, and one of the priests stops and looks up at him and gives him the sign of the cross, and Joe just like holds up the leg of meat to him like, hey, and then laughs and eats it. It's wonderful.
Then he meets his friend Antonio. Why this guy has a friend, I have no idea. He stinks of the grave. I'm sure he's got meat all in his beard on a day where it's certainly not fashionable to have meat all in your beard. And his buddy Antonio, for whatever reason, just likes hanging out with him. Antonio has this girlfriend named Teresina, and, they all meet up on the street. And of course, because Joe is a total dickhole, he kisses Teresina forcibly, and she bites his lip.
Which I'll say this, yes, because eventually we find out that Coffin Joe's motivations are not only hedonistic, where he's like, I just want to do whatever the fuck I want all the time, and everybody's got to bend to my whims. His only belief is in life. And he's like, life is the only thing that there is. That's all that matters. Anything beyond the grave or spiritual is bullshit. You just need to indulge in life. But the only thing that then matters is the continuation of life, which is the continuation of his lineage, his seed. And his wife Lenita apparently is barren,
or simply won't, bear him a child. Like her, infertility is implied but never explicitly explained to the audience. Mm-hmm. His whole philosophy is eventually revealed that like he dresses up very, very spookily and uses this whole spooky aesthetic, not because he likes it necessarily, but because he knows the sort of spooky stuff scares religious and superstitious people.
Yeah, he does it specifically to be antagonistic.
Right. He himself doesn't really give a shit about spirits or anything like that, just thinks it's all, hokum. But he knows it freaks out everybody else, so that's why he does that. He's just so antagonistic towards everybody. He then goes to a bar and he starts playing cards with a group of guys. And then because, like I said, he's a total asshole, he starts a fight with a guy, breaks a bottle, and then uses the partly smashed bottle to sever the guy's fingers.
And this is, again, you got to remember, 1964, this is in black and white. Still, this movie's gory.
Not crazy gory to set your expectation correctly. It's not even Night of the Living Dead gory.
It gets there at certain points. I think there's enough of because the first time we have a kill in the movie, it's bloodless. It's that Joe decides to kill Lenita, and I believe he paralyzes her and then releases a spider on her that bites her and kills her.
He ties her up.
Oh, he ties her up. Okay.
Yeah, he ties her up, he gags her, and then he unleashes a tarantula on her, and she dies of the spider bite. But, back to the bar scene, he cuts the guy's fingers off, and, did they throw him out of the bar for being a finger cutter offer? Absolutely not. They just let him stay around. They serve him food, they give him wine, and this Dr. Rodolfo shows up, a very young, handsome guy. And Joe puts on a show and offers to pay for all the guy's, medical care and all, for the severed fingers. And then as soon as Joe makes a move on the young, pretty bartender, Maria, her uncle tries to kick Joe's ass. But then Joe's eyes turn red like he's the fucking Hulk. Like you see the veins stand out in his eyes. They do a cross dissolve to what I think were scleral lenses that they put in, and they could not have been comfortable because you see the veins around the iris of the eye start to stand out. And Joe just beats this guy's ass.
This becomes Coffin Joe's kind of, I don't know, it's his moment every time he's about to have a really violent explosion. They do this cross dissolve with his eyes turning into bloodshot rage eyes, and I'm like, oh yeah, Coffin Joe's about to do some shit.
Which is, it's weird because it almost seems like it's a supernatural power or a superpower,
right? But
the guy himself rejects any notions of the supernatural or the superstitious or religious.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. There's definitely some things I feel like that are at odds with Zay or Joe's whole philosophy. But, you know, ultimately the film is about proving him wrong, and, you know.
Well, we'll certainly get there. But I want to talk, because we're talking about some of the filmmaking here, because it is important to, again, recontextualize. Like, this is as professional a production as could happen with, you know, the limitations in place. This is, for all intents and purposes, a pretty amateur film.
It certainly wasn't his first film, though.
No, but Marins as a director, it's so clear that he wants to experiment and try a lot of different things. And there are a lot of transitions in, like, it's very rare for them to use the same transition between scenes twice.
Right. It's definitely got an idea of how to push the envelope in terms of cinematic language, but it's not, you know, stylistically out there, you know, not, particularly not for 1964.
Sometimes there's weird stuff where, like, one of the transitions is, it looks like a spider web or glass is cracking over the image. And then my favorite one is, it's a close-up of Coffin Joe's eyes, and at first his face, and then everything gets blacked out except his eyes. And then just his eyes are there, and they kind of like spin around as that's the transition into the next scene.
It's like the Batman.
Yeah, it's. But I love that kind. It's creating these strong visual reminders of, like, it's like, yeah, that's. It's clear that some of the transitions, because he'll do like a wipe. He'll never use that transition more than once. But it's like, okay, that was one. Then he'll do one where the image kind of flips on itself.
Yeah, it's odd because, like, sometimes you get the sense and you watch that you're watching outsider art. But you realize, I think, appreciating the whole of the movie, you're like, oh, this guy actually kind of knew what he was doing, and he was pushing himself to do really bold things. Like, later on, there are some more audacious effects, but he knows how to use a powerful cut to propel the story forward, or how to have a scene transition propel the story forward. And I think that's important because the structure of the movie is, I think, a little unconventional. I think the first third of the movie all takes place on one day, and it basically just accompanies Joe from one scenario to the next scenario. As he's like, okay, he does this, and then he goes to the bar, and then after the bar, you know, he meets up with Antonio again, and then he goes home and he contemplates killing Lenita, and then taking Teresina as his own, and so he kills Lenita, and then the doctor from the bar shows up to see Lenita's body. So it's just this, like, and on and on and on and on and on. And then there's a cut to 15 days later where he is talking to Antonio about the loss of Lenita. And this is actually one of the most interesting scenes in the movie, where he and Antonio are just sort of sitting around and shooting the shit. It was like a scene out of, you know, a French film of the time. It was, you know, just two characters sitting around having a drink and talking about their philosophies. It's tough to know whether or not Joe is being genuine, but it's interesting nevertheless.
Well, because we know that Joe's machination is eventually to get Antonio out of the picture by killing him, and then take Teresina as his own. I think Joe is always being himself in every scene. It's, as far as having to put on an act, it happens in the movie, but most of the time when he's allowed to apparently have free reign over this little town, he does. So he has no impetus behind not being himself, except when he's trying to cover up the fact that he's committed a murder.
Right, which he does shortly thereafter. You know, he talks about some sort of classic atheist sentiments and classic atheist stances, but then he reveals himself to be extraordinarily arrogant, and then he flat out says to Antonio that he's like, I believe I'm strong, I'm liberated, and I get my strength from making people who believe in all this stuff feel afraid. And then he hits Antonio over the head with a fireplace poker, like you do, and drowns him in the bath because, like, he's your only friend, so, you know.
They were going to go fishing.
Yeah.
There's this great boat when he meets up with him, and it's like he drops all kind of like Coffin Jonas, and he's just a guy, and he's like, oh yeah, we're going to go fishing at some later point. And I'm like, okay. I was like, I said, he was like, where's that deleted scene? I want Coffin Joe out on a little, you know, ramshackle boat with Antonio fishing. But yes, he does kill Antonio, and this leaves him open to, in his way, get Teresina and get her to bear him a son.
Yeah.
But Teresina is like, I know you killed him.
Sure.
I know you did this.
Yeah, at Antonio's burial, she outright accuses him in front of everybody else of killing Antonio, and she manages to get the rest of the villagers on her side, and they kind of start hatching a scheme to run him out of town.
And so there is another attack scene against Teresina, which, by the way, I want to go back to the original when he's walking her home one night, and he assaults her, and you said that she bites his lip. They do a close-up of that happening where she's really biting Marin's lip. Again, that might not seem like anything to people in today, but for a movie in 1964, that seems pretty incredible to see a close-up of that.
I mean, particularly for U.S. cinema.
Yes, that's what I mean. And so when I talk about this movie being transgressive, it's all about recontextualizing it for that time, and still those things shocked me. And then in this scene, when he assaults Teresina again, he is literally just, at first he's slapping her, and then he closed fist punches her in the face.
Well, and they feature footage from this in the opening credit sequence of the film, and I was just like, Jesus, this is not what I expected it to be. You know, it's violent, it's uncomfortable. He actually, before he goes over to to Teresina's place, he buys the parakeet from the local bar, because they just have a parakeet, you know, and he takes it over to her house and, you know, says he's going to give it to her as a gift. But then while this guy is assaulting her, we reveal that she has the parakeet in her fist and has crushed it to death in her fist. And it's like, Jesus, this is weird. This is starting to get like really, like, I don't know. It felt, like you said, transgressive in a way that felt almost profane, like, because it's in the context of, you know, superstition and religion. It started to feel like, I don't know, this movie was casting a spell. Ugh, it felt icky.
Well, it very may well be. So he beats up Teresina, and this is another just, I can't believe it's in this movie, is he beats her up and she has blood coming out of her mouth, and then he leans in and kisses her bloody mouth. Again, I'm like, this is genuinely disturbing in a way that you do not expect from films of this era. I
mean, we kind of saw similar things in Martin.
Sure, absolutely.
And I kind of had a similar, you know, icky vibe to that opening sequence on the train in Martin.
Sure, but this is what, 10, maybe more years before Martin?
13, 14 years?
Yeah, so I mean, and again, there's just the context of like, when you see these older movies that are in black and white and that have those certain elements in them, there's just things you don't expect. And At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul continues to throw these unexpected things that, again, it makes it feel truly like it's crossing the line a lot.
Well, this is one of the crucial things that I think is important about this whole Global Gonzo series, is that, you know, we tend to contextualize things because we're American in terms of what American cinema was doing at the time. When we watch a film from, say, the 60s or from any time period, really, we're thinking about what was American cinema doing at the time. By getting more context about what cinema was doing globally, I feel like it's a great way to understand not only the art of cinema, but also history. You know, learning that Brazil at a federal level at a country level had loosened up restrictions on cinema in terms of rating and censorship, and sort of left it up to individual states, it's like, oh, that explains a lot of how this film and why this film did what it did. You know, it's under this new atmosphere of, you know, a liberated art from an independent artist who shot it all in one soundstage. So you see sets are reused, and they're reused, you know, cleverly enough. I think if you restored the film to high definition, you would see a few more of the seams. Like whenever you see somebody's front door in an exterior shot in this film, it was not shot outside. It was shot interior in a soundstage. And the fake door has been dressed differently a little bit for everybody's front door.
Right. So you said to me, you were like, everybody has the same front door in this movie. It's like, yeah, that's all. That's the only front door they had to work with. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple exterior shots, I believe.
There is one scene, I think, after Lenita dies, that he's actually out in a street, like in daylight, and they film a real exterior. Otherwise, I think everything else happens in the soundstage,
which is impressive. I mean, this is the kind of thing I love about amateur independent film, is when if you get somebody who's determined and who has a vision, they can make something work. And it's, you know, Marins even was not supposed to be Coffin Joe. He had to replace an actor that was supposed to be in the production, and then either didn't show up or canceled or whatever, and he had to take on the role himself.
And he became a cult icon in Brazil because of that.
Yeah, and he owns it. Like, he is the movie. And as it's interesting because as genuinely awful as Coffin Joe is throughout the movie, and he is truly awful, my God, it's so entertaining to watch Marin's performance of him.
He's definitely the protagonist of the film, but he's also the villain at the same time. This harkens back to classic stories like, I don't know, let's A Christmas Carol or Telltale Heart, where the protagonist has done something truly awful, and the rest of the story is a moral tale about how, you know, they get their just desserts. So even Creepshow did similar things.
Sure, this is classic horror storytelling in which you have an awful protagonist, and in the end, they will either learn the error of their ways or they will get what's coming to them. And we're going to find out what happens to Coffin Joe in that regard. But
so when Joe or Zay, depending on what you want to call him, assaults Terezinha, she threatens to commit suicide and haunt him from beyond the grave. And of course, Joe, being who he is, not believing in any of that stuff, says, well, you don't have the courage to do it, and B, I don't believe that haunting from beyond the grave is a thing. So do whatever you want. I don't think you have the guts to kill yourself. She kills herself. There is this really powerful cut to Terezinha hanged. You know, we cut to this harsh scream, you know, this close up on this, I think it's a girl or a woman who has discovered the hanged body of Terezinha.
I think it's a child.
And then the first time we see Joe shaken or worried is when he realizes that Terezinha did have the courage to kill herself. And, you know, we see this guy who's been such a jerk for the first time go, uh-oh, well, that's not good.
Well, and of course he's bummed out because it's like, oh, I didn't think she'd actually do it. And now I don't have a woman who I can, you know, who will bear me a son. She leaves a suicide note. And I think the police or potentially the doctor as well are looking at this, and they're like, well, she doesn't directly implicate him in the note, so we can't put this on him.
Right.
So he's still out there being an asshole.
But she threatens specifically to take Joe's soul at midnight.
Yes.
And Joe then goes to the local graveyard and he starts taunting all the spirits. He's standing on, you know, gravestones and stuff like that. And the witch we saw from earlier, she doesn't like this shit at all. And she tells him that he's going to live all the horrors of hell.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, when he goes to the graveyard, he comes across a grave that has a bunch of offerings on top of it, including like I think a bottle of wine, and he just takes the shit from the graves, which is just like, oh my God, this guy is just sacrilegious, doesn't even cover it. But then when you're talking about, he stands on top of like a grave or a mausoleum or something, and there is a dolly shot where the camera dollies forward onto him where he's just like, spirits, like I'm alive and you're dead. Screw you. Ha ha.
Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. You can't do anything because you're not real.
Exactly. And this Dalian shit, it's like, God damn it, this is cool. They're doing whatever they can with what they have to experiment somehow and do different things. I think the cinematic ambition of the movie, it far outreaches, its grasp, but it's trying all the time.
Well, it's clear that from a directorial standpoint, there was a vision here. Marins wanted to make a certain kind of film, had very limited resources to do so, but I think it's pretty clear that he executed what he set out to do. Like, no matter how many compromises he had to make to get this thing done, it feels like this was done with a really solid feeling of intentionality. Like, this is, executing what it's set out to do. At this point in the story, Dr. Rodolfo, who was the doctor who showed up at the bar earlier, suspects that there is a homicidal maniac in town. And of course, just as he's typing up a report about this, Joe shows up to intimidate him. And what does Joe do? Well, he takes his long fingernails and pokes the doctor's eyes out, and then takes what looks to be like rubbing alcohol or, formaldehyde or something like that, flammable, pours it all over him and fucking strikes a match and immolates the doctor.
It's crazy. I mean, this gag where they have the camera directly facing Joe, and he puts his long two fingers, he pokes it into the camera, and then
it's like a shot from a 3D movie.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And then we cut to the doctor, and instead of just putting like an appliance on his eyes to make it look like it's all bloody, they actually put in what looked like full black contacts that are in his eyes. So his eyes are still open, but then they've got blood all over it too. It's kind of nastier to me. It adds to the surrealness of the violence in the movie.
Yeah, and I think this is another sequence where we actually see Coffin Joe Hulk out. He gets the crazy eyes going.
Yeah, he's got his bloodshot rage eyes. He's got to have that. But if you wanted to just watch the movie as a horror fan who likes stuff like the Friday the 13th movies because you like the kills, you like the inventive violence, this movie scratches that itch really well.
I don't know if I agree. It's not necessarily like an inventive, slasher film.
I mean, well, it's not a slasher film because some of his victims don't die, but inventive. Have you seen another movie where somebody uses a crown of thorns on a Jesus model to stab somebody in the face?
No, but I've seen other movies make similar moves with metaphors just like that. I mean, like, it's clear that this movie is all about the religious story. Like, this is, taking place, made as a piece of art in a climate of, strong Catholicism. And so it's clear that this is what the filmmaker wanted to talk about, because it's something that was clearly on his mind. And so using, that sacrilegious imagery is something, he wanted to provoke. It was definitely something that was going to be provocative among the Brazilian population. And, that provocative nature put butts in seats. This did well. It had a whole bunch of sequels, and the character continued to show up. Then here's where we start to get to like the Edgar Allan Poe kind of stuff. Joe goes back to his place, and the clock turns to midnight, and he is haunted by the spirits of Dr. Rodolfo and Terezinha and Antonio and Lenita. He doesn't actually see them, but, at this point we can hear their voices, and the wind is blowing and the windows are banging.
And he's just screaming, and he is just, yelling like, I don't believe in you. I renounce God. And he's laughing and cackling. It's, again, I think Marins' performance is really good in this movie.
This is where the character is clearly losing his grip on whatever he thinks he has, like his sense of control. Like, he wants to be able to control people around him. He wants to control them through fear, and he wants to use all these things that he perceives as weaknesses, like faith and superstition. He wants to use them against him, or wants to use it against them, rather. And, while this sort of maelstrom of haunting and, the storm is blowing around him, he says, I did it for you, Terezinha. You didn't give me a son. You have doomed my bloodline to extinction. Damn you. Curse your faith. He screams, and he's drinking. And Then we get our second sort of jump forward in time. And this time it doesn't tell you exactly how much time has elapsed. It's just on the Day of the Dead. I'm not quite sure when that is in Brazil, but whatever the case may be, it is the Brazilian Day of the Dead. And of course, Coffin Joe thinks it's all bullshit.
Yeah, well, it starts at the bar because a couple of the patrons there are like, all right, we're done. We got to leave. We got to get back home because it's the Day of the Dead. You can't be outside.
Yeah, there's a procession of the dead that you'll see and all this kind of stuff.
And of course, Coffin Joe's at the bar like, what are you talking about? Stay here. Have a drink with me.
Eat meat.
Yes, eat meat.
Let me cut your fingers off.
And of course, every time he's been to this bar, somebody will say something or approach him to the effect of like, why does nobody stand up to this guy? Like, everybody's so afraid of him. It's apparent that he is wealthy. I think he might be one of the wealthiest people in this town or village.
Well, he's got the market cornered on grave digging, I can tell you that.
Right.
If there was somebody who tried to, move in on that market and be some competition, he'd just fucking kill him.
but there's also a wealth thing with him because, like you said, he offers to pay for the injuries of the one guy. When he buys the bird from the bar, they say it's like, oh, the bird's not for sale. And he just keeps saying, what's its price? What's its price? Is this enough? Is this enough? Like, he's flaunting his money around.
I mean, early on, and on a similar note, he says to somebody, he's like, anybody I have to kill, I'm going to charge double to build your coffin.
Which is a great line. Just
He's
another
got big balls
asshole line from Coffin Joe. I love him so much. But yes, he's at this bar, and I can't remember the guy. I think it's another guy who just stands up like, we're tired of your shit. Like, screw you. Or no, is it the uncle again?
Yeah, he tries to put the moves again on Maria, the bartender, and of course everybody else hates him for it. So they confront him, and this is the guy that, Joe mashes the crown of thorns into his face.
Yeah, there's a little model Jesus there, and he takes the crown of thorns off of it, and he mashes the crown of thorns into the guy's cheek. A wonderful gore effect on that. It looks gnarly.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want a crown of thorns to be embedded in my cheek.
But again, for a 1964 black and white amateur Brazilian movie, it looks good. It looks nasty.
Yeah, and then there's this, like you said before, there's this woman who shows up. Her name is Marta, and I think she's in town for the Day of the Dead festivities, but she walks in and says that she missed her train out of town, and she wants one of the guys in the bar to accompany her to her aunt's house. And of course, Joe is the one to volunteer.
Yeah, nobody else will go out because it's Day of the Dead. They're like, no, you should just, we'll put you up here at the bar and everything. And she's like, oh, no, I need to stay in a hotel and stuff. And Joe's like, I'll walk out with you. I don't care. And while he's walking out with this woman, he runs into the witch again because earlier he went, what was it? It was it Teresina and Antonio? They were going to go to the witch to have their fortunes read.
Yes, and they do.
Yes, and that was earlier in the film, and when Coffin Joe hears this, he's like, all right, I'll tag along. That sounds stupid. He's that kind of a dick. He's like, I'll get a laugh out of watching these people believe in something superstitious.
Oddly, he reminds me a lot of Justin Long's character in Drag Me to Hell during that sequence where she goes to get her fortune read.
That's not a bad pull. But so that after this reading with the witch, he calls her out and is like, this is all bullshit. And she's like, you're going to get yours, Coffin Joe.
Earlier, when she read the fortunes of Teresina and Antonio, she's like, I can't tell you what this is other than that I see a death omen. And I can't charge you for having your fortune read because I don't charge when a death omen appears. Evidently, one of the omens of death is an owl. And Coffin Joe, I think, I don't know if it's in this movie, but in other movies, I think you see him maybe with an owl pendant, but you do see the image of an owl earlier in the film, I believe in the credits sequence.
Oh yeah, during the ooky spooky haunted house credits with skeletons and spooky bats and stuff, which is great.
So Joe tries a different approach with this Marta woman. He's like, if I play this right, she's not gonna run out on me. She's not gonna escape me. So he drops her off. And of course, it's the same front door that everybody else has. Mm-hmm. But, as he's walking away, a black cat crosses his path, and there's an adorable fake owl that, shoots out of the trees and swoops at him.
Well, first of all, love this owl. But yeah, when he was taking her home, he runs into the witch, and she says, like, these 3 things are going to happen to you. and then at midnight you're going to hell. And so after he drops her off, one of the three, it's like, oh yeah, black cat's going to happen, an owl's going to cross your path. And when that owl, we can't overstate how adorable this fake owl is.
I mean,
He's
it's
so
like,
cute.
It's like a cuckoo clock going off, it shoots out at the audience. It's so cute.
It's adorable. And it shoots directly into the camera. It's so wonderful.
It's kind of like a 3D shot, like the fingers coming out at the camera to poke the doctor's eyes out. But then the movie goes like full Christmas Carol, and the spirit of Antonio with like full skull face paint appears. And, Coffin Joe screams in terror. He's obviously never seen anything like this before. This is like totally brain breaking for him. And the weirdest effect in the film happens. It's an optical effect where I don't know quite what they did or how they did it, but there's almost like a glittery outline that appears, like an aura around Antonio's spirit.
Yeah, he's walking through the graveyard, and when Antonio's spirit comes out, I think he has a candle in his hand, and he's presenting the candle to Joe, and that's when Joe freaks out. And this aura around him, I don't know if it's like it looked like tinsel to me.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's animated one frame at a time.
Right. So it's like, I don't know if when they were doing the optical effect, if they were just like, okay, we're going to just overlay this onto the image, and then, when we process it, that's how it'll look. It is incredibly amateur and cheap, but again, there's something endearing where it's like they wanted to have a spooky aura, and this was the way they were able to make that happen.
Well, and it's not laughable in the way that it's cheap. It's something where you see the intention.
It's
and
truly
you go,
endearing.
The intention and the execution are close enough where you're just like, I get what they're going for. It's not stupid. It works. And then, Coffin Joe basically loses his mind. He crawls into a crypt, of course, like where all these people that he's murdered have been buried. He looks at their coffins, which he was the one who built these coffins for all of them.
Well, even before that, there's one of my favorite images in the movie, which is this. It's a simple thing. They just turn the negative on the film on this, but there is a procession of ghosts that look like they're in front of some kind of void or something.
Yeah,
it's really creepy.
It's creepy and psychedelic, oddly, for a black and white movie.
Yeah, exactly. This movie feels like you were saying, where it's like, oh, you're almost watching outsider art. It's where it's like this classifies as experimental.
In some regards, yes.
In terms of how to execute effects and the cinematic language, you can tell that these are things that they were trying out.
Yeah, and when you read about Marins, this guy was, he wasn't some like Neil Breen character who just wanted to make outsider movies after his career as an architect. Like, no, this was sort of, I don't know, more of like a Jodorowsky kind of guy where he was into like weird art and, wanted to, make art collectives and, make, boundary pushing art with other people. And he continued to do so throughout his career. Erotic art and all this just sort of strange stuff that seems very, I don't know, sort of in line with what, somebody like Alejandro Jodorowsky would do, but on that sort of, shoestring budget where he was forced to work within very, very severe limitations.
It's clear that, as we keep saying, he had a vision, and not only did he have a vision, he had the talent to execute it in some form. Maybe not in the greatest form he would have wanted, but that's the story of all artists. He was able to do what he could with what he had. And at the most important level, I think he understood that the character of Coffin Joe and the story that was being told were enough to grab people, that if certain effects weren't the greatest, it was fine, because the intention, like you're saying, the intention behind them was clear. And that's why, so this whole end sequence where we see these spectral effects, it never comes off as hokey or cheap in a demeaning way. And then this ending I think is a wonderful ending, in which he's in the crypt where Teresina and Antonio's coffins are. And he's like, I know you're dead. I know you're in there. So he's going to rip open the coffins, and we see their corpses. And Joe just starts screaming. And I think at this point, I don't know what the impetus behind, I think it's because of the woman that he was taking with him or what happened at the bar. The townsfolk are finally getting their torches in hand. Like, all right, we had enough of this asshole.
Yeah, fuck this guy. Totally understandable. He's terrible. So, they eventually find him what appears to be dead, hanging out of a window in the crypt. And this is what could have been the end of Coffin Joe if this movie hadn't been a rather surprising hit all throughout Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
In 1967, he released the direct sequel to this. That movie goes under the name This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse.
Which, I mean, we haven't even said it. These are great titles.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's translated fairly literally from the Portuguese. But, you know, the synopsis of this is like Coffin Joe gets out of the hospital and he goes back to his village. He pretty much gets up to his old tricks. And it's like, well, that's fucking weird. But the whole Coffin Joe routine actually went some really strange places. What I mean by this is like it actually started to become something that, you know, Marines had to think about as like an identity because people knew him as Coffin Joe. You know, he would host like, you know, he was like a horror marathon host as Coffin Joe. He had an interview show that he did. And, you know, he was sort of unable to escape this identity. And in 1974, he was already making like a meta horror film about the dichotomy between himself and Coffin Joe. It was something called The Bloody Exorcism of Coffin Joe. In Portuguese, it was Exorcismo Negro, which means black exorcism. And it was sort of an alter ego movie where he had to accept that like he and Coffin Joe were almost sort of the same person.
This is literally New Nightmare being done almost 20 years before New Nightmare.
Yeah, but with like way more Andy Warhol in it.
Sure, of course. I mean, that's this, you know, kind of outsider, you know, this isn't a big movie studio movie, but like you're saying, the plot of that movie is that I believe he's making another Coffin Joe movie. He's playing himself.
Yeah.
And it has to be, and he's like, okay, well, what is, this is who I am to people, and what's the difference between that? And then Coffin Joe is a character in the movie, like against merit. Like, it's clear that this one movie, At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, was so incredibly monumental in Brazilian film history and obviously in Brazilian horror history. And the fact that it is so sacrilegious in a way that, like we're saying, you know, it's like he's king of the edgelords in a way that's kind of delightfully juvenile, but was clearly enough to tap into this audience. And I think because in the end, Coffin Joe is assumed dead at the end of At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, that it's like, okay, this guy may have been an asshole and a big atheist and rubbing shit all over our beloved Catholic beliefs, but in the end, he got his.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of a Freddy Krueger thing where, yes, we know Freddy Krueger is terrible and a killer and likely a child molester, but that doesn't prevent him from becoming the cultural icon, you know, that people love and, you know, I hesitate to say identify with, but, you know, they want to have him be their mascot in a lot of ways. It's so strange.
Well, Wes Craven has talked about this where with Freddy Krueger, and he's like, the idea of taking the monster and embracing it and owning it takes away its power. We have a little Michael Myers like candy dish thing in our house. And it's like, yeah, that is the living embodiment of pure evil, the shape. And he's a little candy dish now. Like
he's a Funko Pop.
Right. Exactly. Everything's a Funko Pop. And it's like, once you embrace the monster and it gives you power over it instead of it power over you. And with Coffin Joe, I think that's something that kind of occurred where it's like, yeah, he is just this, you know, very clear cut figure that, you know, has a very distinct look and everything, cuts a great silhouette. But when you go back to this original film and look at it, it's like, yeah, this is the definition, I believe, of trailblazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a willingness to push people's boundaries in terms of taste. and in terms of what they found to be within the boundaries of their culture. To be able to lampoon Catholicism while also clearly having respect for people's beliefs and their superstitions. Because what is a superstition other than a belief that, some people just don't take seriously? Mm-hmm. It's often, something that people have trouble explaining, why they feel a certain way, why they believe a certain thing. But I think this movie's ability to evaluate those things is crucial to part of its success and why it caught on. But, I think even more than this movie itself, as one film, I was way more interested in what Marins did as a filmmaker and as an artist. I think his legacy is something that American horror fans should look into more, just because he has such a strange filmography and lots of varied stuff. Like just the fact that he did that Bloody Exorcism movie in 1974, where it's him coming to having a reckoning with this whole dual identity thing is pretty cool. So who knows? Maybe we'll do more Coffin Joe stuff in the future. Maybe I'll start watching this stuff on my own. Whatever it is, whatever future we have with this stuff, I look forward to it.
No, I mean, I'm certainly interested in This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, and the Bloody Exorcism of Coffin Joe. We're going to track that down. I want to see that. That sounds fascinating because there's been other. Lucio Fulci did a movie, Cat in the Brain, which is the same. He's playing himself and he's directing a horror movie and it's driving him crazy. I think that was 1990. So this is a thing, but this is the earliest riff I've ever heard of somebody doing that, specifically in the horror genre in film. So I'm deeply fascinated by this. I'm so glad I finally watched this movie because it's one I had just a peripheral knowledge of. And after he passed away earlier this year, I was like, I'm sorry it took that, but I'm like, this is an important film historically, and certainly towards our horror genre interests. And after seeing it, I'm so glad because it is crazy. It is, I think it does merit being under the Global Gonzo moniker because there's stuff in this that is out there and that will still, I think, be a little too much for some people. Even I'm extremely glad we finally watched it. And I hope this, and one thing we will say before we go over to the shelf, somebody please restore this movie.
Yeah. I think the sort of rough-hewn nature of it really merits a restoration, not because the movie will look really, really good, but I think we'll be able to appreciate the kind of, homespun effort that went into making this on such a low budget. And being able to see the sort of rough edges, I think, will make it more charming.
And hopefully a restoration will just mean more people will have the opportunity to see this. Because like you said, horror fans, I think this is a must-see for anybody who considers themselves like a hardcore horror film fan or amateur historian. I think this is crucial watching. But I think it's time to head over to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And as always, we want to encourage you loyal listeners to go to genrevision.com, comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks, and we will feature them in next week's episode. Travis, what's your shelf pick for At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul?
My shelf pick is David Cronenberg's The Brood, which was boundary pushing in the sense that it had children killing people, ugly, nasty, little monstrous children killing people. But it's the eventual reveal of why children are killing people that I think makes it such an interesting pairing for At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. In Midnight, you have a guy who's obsessed with having a child to carry on his legacy. And in The Brood, you have a character who is creating this titular brood of little children, little monstrous children, because of the emotional aftermath of her divorce. And so these emotions that are manifesting into these beings, they're coming out of her. She's actually giving birth to beings that are because of all this pent-up emotion inside her. And so, whereas Coffin Joe is dealing with this whole structure of Catholicism, Cronenberg, and you see this throughout so many of his movies, is dealing with the rise of New Age, thinking in psychology. And so he has this psychologist character who is encouraging this person to go through this sort of treatment to be able to express her emotions and to be able to get her emotions out, to take the internal and make it external. And that turns it into The Brood. It's a fascinating film. And it is in the Criterion Collection. So there's a great version of it out there for everybody to watch.
Yeah, it's Cronenberg, and it's one of his weirder movies, which for Cronenberg, that should tell you something. But yes, it's an absolute must see. That final, the big reveal of everything that's going on will never leave my brain.
Anyway, what will you pull off the shelf this week?
Well, it may sound like a basic pull, but I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I'm pulling George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Obviously, we lost George Romero, and he passed on, and he's a filmmaker that more and more I keep coming back to and really finding a lot in his movies and his approach to filmmaking and independent filmmaking. In a way, he really was kind of always a true independent filmmaker for the majority of his career. And Night of the Living Dead, it's a movie that everybody knows about. Everybody understands its historical importance and how transgressive it was as a black and white horror film in the 60s. But when Criterion released their version of Night of the Living Dead and did a restoration on it, I watched it, and it was like seeing the movie for the first time. A movie that has run on late night television for the majority of my life, that I've had at least 2 copies on DVD that were the public domain version that has been out there forever since the movie lapsed into the public domain. And I don't, as much as everybody would talk about, the importance of it because of, Dwayne Jones as the lead actor being black and the ending and its political meaning and the idea of ghouls, before they were called zombies, rising from the dead, and this being the foundation for that, which has just taken over so much of horror fiction. When I watched the Criterion version, it was an eye-opener to me on how great of a filmmaker Romero was.
Yeah, I think a new restoration, or the proper restoration, can do wonders for a film. I mean, I remember when I first got glasses, I was, 15, something like that. And I didn't realize at the time how nearsighted I was. My eyes have since changed, and I'm not nearly as nearsighted as I was, but like putting on those glasses for the first time and being able to see details across the street that I had been missing, it was revelatory. And then seeing Night of the Living Dead on Criterion was a similar experience. It's like, yeah, I'm so familiar with this as, a story, and as a vibe, as being able to see the movie, God knows how many times on lesser formats. But then actually seeing this treated well was like watching almost an entirely different film. And it really draws a lot of attention to the craft in ways that other versions might not.
Yeah, it's always going to be, and I listed among my favorite films because as much as I've seen it throughout my life, it's a movie that even watching that Criterion restoration, which by the way, we didn't mean to pick 2 Criterion movies and, show for Criterion, unless they want us to, please send us stuff, Criterion. That seeing it was so eye-opening and so only reinforced that this is not a movie we should just relegate as historically relevant. It's like, oh yeah, Night of the Living Dead, it's a great movie, and we all know about it. We've read about it in articles and film books and stuff like that. If you have not sat down and watched Night of the Living Dead in a while, get your hands on a good restoration version of it, the Criterion restoration. I don't know what's out there on streaming platforms, what the quality is, but if you have not sat down with that movie in a long time, you need to do that because it is still incredibly effective. It's still, I think, transgressive in a lot of ways. And as much as that core idea of that movie has been extrapolated on a billion times in pop culture, when you go back to the source of it, it's still surprisingly potent.
Can't agree more.
But we do have to get to the listener shelf picks from last week's episode on X-Men Origins Wolverine and X-Men First Class. And we got a lot of them since we did 2 movies. We got a lot of double shelf picks, so we got to go through these pretty quickly, everybody. T-Bones McRoanoke had Superman 3 for X-Men Origins Wolverine and Prisoner of Azkaban for X-Men First Class. Superman 3, a movie that also just keeps getting it wrong at every turn. And Prisoner of Azkaban, both First Class and Prisoner of Azkaban have large casts that really gel, and the movies have fun without losing any of the fantastical or goofy elements. And then loyal listener JT had the shelf pick of the recent Planet of the Apes trilogy in regards to talking about prequels. It took an existing property and spun a thorough and rich tale over 3 whole movies without feeling stretched out beyond any reasonable comprehension. Cough, Hobbit, cough, which I should say, loyal listener Waldrumpus' shelf pick was the Hobbit trilogy in much the same regard as to see how you can mess up doing prequeling, which certainly happened with those movies. Stephen Nesbella had, for X-Men Origins Wolverine, his shelf pick was Solo, a Star Wars story, though that's an insult to Solo, which he enjoyed after rewatching it. And then for X-Men First Class, his shelf pick was the original X-Men, which we might revisit sometime. I don't know.
Maybe.
Jetpack Jesus had for X-Men Origins Wolverine, Oz the Great and Terrible, the Great and Powerful. It has or tries to have the empty style, and it has a checklist of Wizard of Oz things that it includes because they are Wizard of Oz things. And then for First Class, I think that this might be my favorite shelf pick of the week. Bumblebee. He says, granted, it is a prequel to a series of films that have never had a good entry before, but I think it works for some of the same reasons as First Class. Namely, both films come from a place of understanding the underlying IP and not necessarily the preceding films.
Bumblebee's a good movie, y'all.
Yeah, I liked it. Eric Fuchs had for, let me see here. He says, for First Class is like a mixture of James Bond and X-Men. So for X-Men, I'll pick 2009's Push, a really underrated original superhero movie with Chris Evans and Dakota Fanning with mutant-ish powers. And the James Bond pick is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is a movie you either think is one of the best 007 movies ever, or you haven't seen enough Bond. And last but not least, loyal listener Mr. Milksteak's shelf pick was X-Men Days of Future Past. And this is what I consider to be the best X-Men movie out of the current offerings, taking the look of Matthew Vaughn's previous entry and balancing it with Bryan Singer's glossier future sequences. So thank you, everybody, for coming out the gate with 2 shelf picks each. And there were so many great comments, and oh man, you guys are just killing it every week with the comments. So thank you so much. But let's do some currently consuming.
Num, 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 num.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
Well, a couple weeks in a row now, you all have said we should watch Rampage, and well,
we watched Rampage.
That's what happened.
So yeah, we're both going to talk about Rampage. So we watched Rampage, y'all, and I'm sorry. Like I feel bad that I didn't like it more because I didn't dislike the movie.
Well, I mean, y'all know me, still the same old G.
Y'all know how I learn a living.
Yeah, right.
So, well, okay. Because here's the thing, I will say because Travis and I were both just like, all right, we're going to watch Rampage this week and talk about it currently consuming. And I went in thinking like, okay, Travis will probably be kind of whatever about it. And I'll probably be a little more like, no, there's good stuff here. I like Giant Monster. I'm an easy mark, for this kind of stuff. Rampage, here's the thing. I can't call Rampage a bad movie. It's a movie that knows exactly what it is and what it's trying to be. The problem is that what it's trying to be is extraordinarily basic. And I think that's okay when it comes to the monster fun. Nothing else ever rises above that basicness.
No, I mean, the prologue from the movie is like, I don't know, it's like the movie Life with Jake Gyllenhaal and Ryan Reynolds compressed into a 3-minute short. And I was just like, well, okay, I'm already in a place that I don't really like. It's just sort of jumping these hurdles of like, okay, yeah, there's a monster. We're not going to show it. It's not going to matter. And then, an astronaut plummets to Earth and then they die. And then, we meet these characters who we think are going to matter. Like, the movie spends time to introduce us to this sort of cast of randos that surround themselves, with The Rock and a bunch of gorillas. And they don't end up mattering to the movie at all. Like, they just sort of drop out and it just becomes The Rock show. And it was just like, who are these Jurassic World nobodies? Like,
well, see, when you say Jurassic World, because you said to me, it's like, oh, this is getting Jurassic World vibes. When I ended up watching it, the thing I took away was like, oh yeah, The Rock is just action man. Like, he's not a well-defined enough character. It's like, okay, he has this relationship with the albino gorilla George. It's like, okay, this is like the Chris Pratt and Blue.
Yeah, but of course they went on to do the same bullshit. They're like, oh, he's an animal trainer guy who also has a military past. And he's very big and beefy and manly. And it's the same bullshit from Jurassic World. And it's the same fucking nonsense that they've done, like this. It's like workplace comedy vibe where, instead of Chris Pratt being, Mr. Sexy Beefcake, Rock is like, nope, can't do no sex. That's not cool in my book. Well, he's just like the ultimate sexist. Like, I don't have time for that. I love my gorilla too much.
Oh yeah, he's got to go home to his dogs. So okay, here, because I don't want to sound like I'm taking a big dump on the movie, because I don't. Here's the thing: I don't feel strongly enough to take a big dump on it.
I would agree.
It's mostly fine. Like, and that's the thing, is that it's rare that the movie ever like escapes finance. Because when you talk about the Jurassic World stuff, I'm like, well, this seems pretty blatant, and there's a part of me that can appreciate like the asylum rip-offed nature of that kind of stuff. There's part of me that isn't totally against that in spirit or morality. Like, I'm like, yeah, rip it off, do whatever you want. If it's fun, it's fun.
As soon as the monsters start showing up and doing big monster stuff, I perked up. I was like, oh, they're actually pulling off some really fun things just in terms of like big monster movie pleasures. But when the movie has to do normal movie stuff, like have characters and have them interact and have them build backstory and try to come up with plot and reasons for characters to do things, like, empty calories. I just,
the thing
fast
is that
forward, please.
This is also a great example of like, this is nothing but a plot movie. Any semblance of character motivation is just that semblance. It's nothing but plot machination with these, cut out figures in place to get everything going. Again, I will suffer that if the actors are good and the base pleasure stuff hits. The actors are fine. Like, nobody's doing a bad job.
No.
Like, Jeffrey Dean Morgan can't help, but Jeffrey Dean Morgan is the only one who I think gets like, look, this is a fucking video game adaptation. Who cares?
He's the only one who gets to chew the scenery, but that's also kind of how his character is written. He's basically written to be a scenery chewer, and they just let him do it. And like, it goes from Life to Jurassic World, and then there's a sequence that is fucking right out of the goddamn Tom Cruise Mummy. And I mean, I will actually give it the edge in that it's a slightly better version of the same set piece, but all that stuff up until that point was just like, I can pretty much watch this on 2.5 speed and I can miss all the dialogue because it's totally unimportant. I hated the villains. I couldn't stand being with them. Particularly I think it's the main villain's younger brother. Like, the main villain is Malin Ackerman, and she's just like evil capitalist who, who's just a total dickhead.
That's fine. I don't mind.
Is just like complete doof, and I couldn't stand his performance. But as soon as it's revealed that, she can turn on this beacon and draw all the monsters towards Chicago, things take a swing for the positive. Like, there is some stuff in Chicago that I was like, oh, hey, that's pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, here, you have no memory or anything about the game, whereas I had the NES port of the arcade game. We rented multiple later Rampage games. It's not like a property I'm deeply invested in the lore of or anything, but I'm familiar enough with it and recognize it. So I'm like, okay, what stuff from the game are they going? Because, we recently did our episode on Super Mario Brothers, and one of the fascinating things about that was like, okay, how are they going to translate this thing from the game into this vision of the movie? And I'm thinking about Rampage. I'm like, well, Rampage is like the simplest fucking thing. Like, it's way less complicated than Super Mario Brothers is. It's like, it's monsters smashing buildings, and the few things they do is like, they step on tanks, and the two things that I thought of were like, in the game, you punch buildings, and sometimes when you punch a window open, there'll be something in the window that you can grab for more points. And sometimes it's a person, and you can yank them out and eat them. So it's like, all right, that's going to happen. There is a person that gets eaten, not in that fashion, by punching a window and grabbing them, King Kong style. But a person does get eaten. The movie has like a kind of twisted PG-13 sense of black humor to its violence at times.
There's a shocking amount of gore. There's a scene where a whole bunch of random bearded dudes with machine guns and assault rifles get into helicopters, and they go track down this wolf monster.
Yeah, Joey Mango is the leader.
Joey Mangoes. Joe Manganiello, I think is his name.
Joey Mangoes.
Sure. He's there, and his whole team gets ate by this wolf. And there is a brief shot, just a couple of frames that you kind of see from his POV or maybe over his shoulder of like his crew torn to shreds. I mean, literal guts hanging out everywhere. And I was like, in a PG-13 movie, they got away with that? I was really surprised.
Even in the life opening, there's all these like severed hands and corpses floating around, but they're on the background or they're out of focus and stuff. And that opening when the re-entry vehicle burns up, it's in the cockpit and you see the explosion and fire go over this woman. I'm like, this is pretty mean for a PG-13 video game.
It's surprisingly violent. Yeah. And then I was enjoying, I was enjoying all the Chicago stuff up until the very last couple of scenes of action where it just turns into total void space. It's just The Rock in front of a green screen. And it's like, is there a set around this guy? I can't even tell. He's not even composited well into the scene.
It's just another gray, nothing void space place.
It's a CGI city rubblescape, basically.
And that was what I was afraid, because like you're saying, there's the shot of Lizzie, the big alligator monster, coming in through the river, and it like knocks over a boat. I'm like, this is kind of fun. I'm digging this.
Yeah, and then it comes out of the river and like stomps on a bunch of people, and it's like this big bloody splat and this smear, and I'm just like, okay, all right. Like, having just done It Came From Beneath the Sea, I'm recognizing like the distinct giant creature pleasures that this is delivering in those moments. But then it goes into this climax where I'm just like, nothing's happening. This is nothing. I'm not looking at anything.
So my only other video game nerdy thing, because this is all, it's like, okay, they have to figure out some plot to wrap around just having a giant wolf, lizard, gorilla, whatever. The bummer in this is that in the original game, the monsters were humans that turned into these giant things. Because whenever you would die, when you would, lose a life to continue, your monster would fall down to the ground and shrink into a human being and like crawl off.
Mm-hmm. And
I was like, okay, I bet that's going to be like a twist or something here. That's like something, and it's like, oh no, it's just DNA. I can't believe how much the term CRISPR is used in this movie, where that was just the hot thing that somebody read an article about. It was like, yeah, CRISPR. Like, and so it's in all the expository dialogue about this. And it's like, we were using CRISPR to CRISPR CRISPRs. And so
these are the crispiest monsters you've ever seen, motherfucker.
Right. I mean, it's widget, like it's that kind of, it's sprocket.
Sure.
But no, Rampage, like, another thing I will say, it's short. I when I went in, it was like, oh, you said it to me. It's like, oh, it's only like 100 minutes. I'm like, it's under 2 hours. Like, it knows it. Yeah, it knows it can't sustain this for more than that time.
It's 100 minutes long. That is always a positive with a movie like this. The sort of big popcorn movies. It's like, yeah, it's not 2 hours long. Okay.
So I see why people like this movie. I get it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I get why it's likable, and I see the things that people can enjoy in it, which are some of the things that we mentioned. But yeah, it was unfortunately kind of what I expected it to be.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. From the previews and things that I had seen of it, it was like, okay, this is expected. Like, I just wish it surprised a little bit more in the positive sense.
Yeah. So we did it, everyone. We watched Rampage. I'm sorry. I wish we liked it. I was kind of I was like, man, people are really going to bat for this. Maybe there's something here we missed. But unfortunately, it just didn't click for us. I'm glad you guys like it though. So yeah, we watched Rampage for you. I hope you enjoyed that. But let us close things out with our
comment of the week.
I literally could pick pretty much any comment this week. You talk about the movies. You are courteous to each other. You have discussions, which I love seeing the discussions that pop out. It's great. I relish getting to see what the comments are, which has never happened to me in the history of having comments on things that I've made. So like being excited to read comments is wonderful. But like I said, we had a number of fantastic comments, but I wanted to point out one from Steven Nespella, who talked about something I brought up. And he says, I appreciate Drew talking about the dice in Solo. For the longest time, I thought I was a lesser Star Wars fan because I had no idea about the dice, and I've watched the original trilogy countless times. I'm glad to hear I'm not alone on the subject, which leads me to posing a question to you loyal listeners. Who knew about the dice in the Millennium Falcon before the Disney movies?
I didn't. I never noticed them before the Disney movies made them into like an important prop.
Yeah, I mean, because I think they made them into an important prop in Force Awakens. Then they followed through in Last Jedi, in Solo. They became this important thing. And I was always like, those were there. I never noticed them. I know when people get into Star Wars, they get into the minutia of the universe so much. If that was a thing that was like really prominent, I want to hear about it, because I was very vindicated to hear from Steven for him to say like, yeah, I never knew those were a thing at all. And I've seen those movies countless times, like we all have. Which, in that episode when we were talking about, it's like that was an indicator of prequelization, of like creating this thing. It's like, oh, it's got so much importance. And it's like, it did? It was? Was it important? So I just want to know. I'm just posing a question out there. Did you know about the Millennium Falcon dice before The Force Awakens and the subsequent Star Wars movies brought them up?
Yeah, if you've listened this far into this episode, please comment.
Yes. So, but we're going to close things out, and we will be back next week with a Versus episode. We're doing, I don't know what we could call this. I could guess
it's the space opera Versus, the contemporary space opera Versus with Valerian versus Jupiter Ascending.
I guess the space opera flops.
Space flopera.
Yeah. See, Travis, I love you, and I love that you're my partner in this, because you come up with amazing things like space flopera. Beautiful. So yes, next week we'll have a space flopera versus of Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets versus Jupiter Ascending. So we hope you'll be back next week for that insanity. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.